Today, I want to talk to you about relationships and relationship difficulty. Behind me, I've got a list of common complaints that I will hear from people, both in my individuals practice, but also my couples practice. I'm sure you will recognize some of them yourself. These are typical issues and complaints that we are all familiar with in our relationships. And they are little keys to what we are missing and wanting from our relationships. So whenever I'm working with couples, the first thing that we need to really get to grips with is understanding our relating styles. Because often our complaints reflect the style with which we relate and also the love and care that we wish to receive. So our relating styles are revealed through a fascinating psychological theory called attachment theory. So I'm going to talk that through with you today. So attachment theory offers us attachment styles, also known as relating styles, okay? So there are three attachment styles, ways of relating: secure, anxious, and avoidant attachments, okay? Secure attachment is, as the name suggests, what we all want, what we're all striving for, the utopia of relationships, the secure attachment. Securely attached individuals are satisfied in their relationships. They're comfortable, they communicate easily, they're happy going to their partner for support, and they're happy for their partner to come and get support from them. So they're very comfortable with needing each other and being needed. There's not a lot of stress, and so this is a low anxiety attachment style. The next attachment style is anxious attachment. Anxiously attached people are quite preoccupied with their relationships. They spend a lot of time thinking about their relationships, trying to make them better, planning things, wanting things. There's a lot of preoccupation there. And there's also a desire for closeness a lot of the time. Anxiously attached people crave closeness, want togetherness, responsiveness, intimacy, etc., etc. And if that isn't happening in the relationship, it can create an overwhelm of feelings. Anxiously attached people can become quite emotional, and because it is a high anxiety relating style, there's a lot of stress in there. There's a lot of worry and fretting and doing and fixing, and there's a lot of stepping into the relationship all of the time because there's this preoccupation with the relationship. They want it a certain way. They want to have a really great, loving, connected relationship, and this becomes something very, very important and very, very key. And if, as I say, they aren't receiving that, they're going to become more preoccupied, more anxious, and the emotions just get more and more and more. So then the third relating style is the avoidant attachment. Avoidant attachment speaks of something very, very key, which is they prefer distance in the relationship. They consider closeness to be quite suffocating, smothering. So it's kind of the opposite to the anxiously attached. The anxiously attached wants closeness, the avoidantly attached struggles with closeness, wants distance. And there are also two categories within avoidant attachment. There's dismissive avoidance, and then there's fearful avoidance. The dismissive avoidance creates the distance that they crave through criticism and grandiosity. So they can be quite grandiose and look down on others and be quite critical. They're quite evasive, hard to pin down, vague. As I say, they like distance in relationships. And they also often resist relationships because they feel like they're fine. They're fine on their own. They don't need relationships. The anxiously attached individual needs relationships. The dismissive avoidant, quite unsure, actually, I don't think I need relationships. So they can be quite resistant. And this avoidant relating style is quite low anxiety because often the dismissive avoidant is quite numbed out, quite shut down emotionally. So there's this absence of anxiety. It's sort of very, very low anxiety. And then the fearful avoidant is, as the name suggests, quite frightened in relationships. They want relationships, unlike the dismissive. The fearful avoidant wants relationships, wants to be together, wants togetherness, but at the same time fearful of that closeness, and can feel quite scared and anxious when relationships progress and closeness increases. So they're a mix. They're a mix of the anxiously attached and the avoidantly attached. And this is also another high anxiety attachment style. So what's interesting about this there are a number of things that are interesting about this. What's interesting about this is that the people who often gravitate towards each other to have relationships are an anxiously attached person and an avoidantly attached person. And this is where problems arise. So as I've already outlined, anxiously attached wants closeness, stepping into the relationship all of the time. The avoidantly attached person doesn't want closeness, actually feels overwhelmed and suffocated by closeness, prefers distance, so is always stepping out of the relationship. And this is the anxious avoidant dance that I've outlined in other videos. And so this is where the complaints can come in from my previous page. But this is also where misunderstandings and conflict then arises, because you've got two people with very conflicting needs whilst trying to have a relationship. And actually, the more avoidant someone becomes, the more anxious the other person comes, or the more anxious the other person comes, the more avoidant. So it becomes this really, really unhelpful cycle. So that's one interesting thing. The other interesting thing is that by their very nature, anxiously attached people and avoidantly attached people have developed these ways of relating because there's been some sort of attachment trauma in their lives. And that could be really obvious because of stuff that's happened in their childhoods, within their families, from their parents, or it could be really, really subtle. You know, there could be inconsistencies in the attachment that you had when you were little. There could be confusing messaging that you received, and as a result, you may develop this anxious attachment or avoidant attachment in adulthood. But the reason why this is incredibly crucial and key, and I work on this a lot with my clients, is that word trauma. If we have attachment trauma, when we are engaging in these relationships that are quite conflicting, we're going to get triggered. Our trauma is going to get triggered. And that's where a lot of this conflict and endless fighting and the sort of negative cycle that I've just outlined, this is why that happens in the relationship. Because we are not in calm, sane state of mind. Actually, our partners have the capacity to trigger us, because if an anxiously attached person craves closeness, underneath that craving is often the fear, often the trauma is some sort of fear of abandonment or rejection. So you can imagine if your fear is to be abandoned or rejected, and then you are with an avoidantly attached person who craves distance in the relationship and is always stepping out of the relationship and wanting sort of separation, that's going to be so triggering for the anxiously attached person. Likewise, if you are avoidantly attached, you fear engulfment, that the other person is going to take over and you're not going to be able to cope. So that's your fear. So then you're in a relationship with this anxiously attached person who's getting really upset because there's not the level of closeness that he or she wants, and is coming in and perhaps and you are experiencing them as being smothering, and then you're going to get triggered. Your fear is going to get triggered, your partner's fear is going to be triggered, and so you both will then start operating in trauma response, also known as survival mode. So in relational terms, this is really, really key, because we're not thinking about the relationship. We're not thinking about our partner and what's happening for them. We're in survival. Survival is kill or be killed, each man for himself. And so we separate into these individual states of mind. And we're in trauma, which we all know is fight, flight, or freeze. And that is how we're operating within our own relationship. Okay, I'm going to explain a bit more about this. This is what trauma and survival looks like in a relationship, okay? Fight, flight, freeze. These are our survival response, trauma response, okay? Where, and they're often very extreme. Trauma is about extreme stuff, but in a relationship, it can be quite low level. It can become quite normalized. This is just the way we roll in this relationship. We can argue. We can attack as part of our fighting. We can constantly be provoking and upsetting our partners. That's us in fight. That's not calm, deactivated. That is, we are in trauma and we're fighting and we're surviving and we're going to win. Okay, that's trauma. That's trauma in action. Flight is when we're storming out, leaving, driving off, whatever. But also, it can also be internally experienced, which is we fantasize about leaving the relationship. We have all these escapist fantasies. That's us in flight. That's the flight part of trauma. Sometimes quite difficult to recognize. And then there's freeze, a very, very, very common way of responding to things. Freeze is when we just shut down, we go silent, we don't know what to do. But also we choose to numb out. We'll numb out on food, alcohol, drugs, porn, you name it. We're going to shut ourselves down and just numb ourselves out, tranquilize those feelings because those feelings are too much. Okay, so sort of freeze is also in like the long term. Freeze is just going through the motions in a relationship. It's just kind of, yeah, whatever, going ahead. Yes, 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 path of least resistance. That's freeze. Freeze in the relationship. There's fear under there. There is survival. What do I need to do to survive? I'll just go with the flow. Okay, so it's really important to recognize this is trauma in our relationships. I know it sounds weird. Trauma in our relationships, yeah. We are so vulnerable in our intimate relationships. Nowhere actually are we more vulnerable. So you bet we're going to be going in and out of survival if we have chosen, which is what happens, anxiously attached people often will be with avoidantly attached people, vice versa. And so we choose these people who are going to trigger us because actually they're going to fulfill our fears. They're going to fulfill our expectations. Whatever happened to us, perhaps in our childhoods or in previous relationships that gave us these fears, we're going to seek people out to perpetuate these fears. Don't forget, as humans, we seek out people who are familiar to us. And we seek out what we know. And we unconsciously recreate what we know. So because it's familiar and it's because it's what we expect. So there's a lot of complex things that happen within the relationship and within the ways that we relate that we're just not aware of. But it's really, really key. We therapists want you guys to know that we are in trauma sometimes in relationship. And when there's trauma, we need to think about triggers. What's triggering the trauma? Okay, so this is what we need to think about next. Because those complaints earlier are part of triggers. Okay, so we need to think about triggers. We need to really think about this very, very carefully. Because we need to think about what our triggers are that are going to trigger us into the trauma response and then into this very unhealthy and unhelpful way of relating. And we're going to have our triggers and our partner is going to have their triggers. So let's have a look at this list. I'm sure you will recognize some stuff and be like, oh yes, that's me. That is definitely what upsets me a lot of the time. And then you might also recognize, oh gosh, yeah, that's when my partner freaks out. I know when I do that. Okay, so we have to start taking responsibility. We need to be very careful. We are not triggering our partners all the time, and we need to be very aware of trying to manage our own responses and not be triggered ourselves. Because as long as we're in trauma, we are not relational. The part of our brain that we need for relationships, the part of our brain that encompasses empathy, which is one of the healthy ways of dealing with this. But the part of our brain that problem solves, gives us empathy, creates loving feeling, creates bonding feelings, all of those shut down when we're in trauma. We simply cannot access them. So we would have to take quite seriously the calming and emotional regulating we need to do to move out of the trauma mode if we've been triggered, and we can begin to recognize when we're triggered, and then we need to really calm ourselves down so our brains can become deactivated out of the stress, And then this other part of the brain can really kick in that will help us succeed in our relationships. That we can then focus on empathy. We can focus on understanding our partners and caring about the impact of our behavior on our partners. And that we can communicate with each other in ways that is not triggering. And also a big part of that is boundary work, boundaries. Boundaries around tone of voice, facial expressions, when people talk about stuff, how much time you have, how much time you spend having intense conversations, because these are the things that are triggering. So we have to sort of really think about, how do we create space in the relationship to be calm enough to be loving, respectful, collaborative with our partners, so we can begin to negotiate and create a healthier and a more loving space. So those fears and those insecurities that are part of anxious and avoidant attachment can reduce, and the secure attachment within us can increase. You know, we need to calm the anxiety down. We need to come out of numbing ourselves if we are in that avoidant category, and really think about, okay, I want to be secure. And part of being secure is not being in trauma all the time. So step one is recognize when you're triggered, recognize when you're going into trauma, and step away, do whatever you need to do to calm down, get yourself into a better state of mind, and then come back into the relationship and start practicing these calming, loving ways of relating that are going to lead you to a secure attachment. And then from that place, all the good stuff comes. We've got the fun, we've got the playfulness, we've got the great sex, we've got the enjoyment, we've got the sort of reciprocity, but we've also got the calmness and the peace. So I really hope I've given you some food for thought. It's a very, very complex subject, but it's really useful to try to empower yourselves with this knowledge so you can start doing better in your relationship and not getting activated and triggered all of the time. Thanks, guys. I'll see you next time.